Ethan never called me mom. Once, I caught him burying his face in my clothes, inhaling deeply. I brushed it off, paid it no mind. Until he was sitting at the head of the table, power radiating from him, and I was trapped in his basement. He offered a diamond ring, cold and heavy, pressing it onto my finger until it bit into the bone. No room for refusal. His words, whispered against my ear, were laced with a chilling tenderness, like a question, "What will you call me now? And what name will you use to beg me for mercy?" "Ethan, your stepson, that one who grew up with nothing. Now that he's in college and seen the world, he's bound to reel in a few girls for fun. He probably doesn't even have time to bother you anymore," Chloe chirped, swirling the ice in her cocktail. "There's a little get-together tonight, come relax. Maybe your big sisters can introduce you to someone nice," Sophia added, winking. Staring at my phone screen, I paused, then corrected them, typing out, "His name is Ethan Blackwood. He's got Richard's temperament. He'll go far." Richard, my late husband. Though, Ethan wasn't our child. The response on the other end of the group chat was muted, the topic quickly changed. "Alright, see you tomorrow then. I'll pick you up." It wasn't that they were afraid of badmouthing Ethan behind his back for fear of offending someone powerful. Richard had left behind a considerable fortune, but technically, Ethan was adrift. His grandparents, Richard's parents who were distantly fond, had passed. The father he barely knew had died of cancer. That left only me, a stepmother barely old enough to be his older sister, as his sole elder. Discovering Ethan's existence had been a shock, a thunderbolt. I believed Richard and I were soulmates, a destined pair. He'd showered me with love, spoiled me relentlessly, eager to give me the world. But he was also a master of omission, silent about the shadows in his past. He'd had a youthful romance, a fleeting affair in his teens, that had left a silent legacy, a child. Concealment and betrayal, hand in hand. Of course, I couldn't accept it. Becoming a stepmother in my 20s? Unthinkable. But then, Richard, rushing after me during our argument, was in a minor car accident. At the hospital, they discovered aggressive cancer, terminal. My pain, my anger, everything froze in the face of mortality. Holding Richard's hand in the sterile hospital room, he'd said 3 things. First, "I love you, Nora." Second, "I'm so sorry." And finally, "Ethan is alone. After I'm gone, please, care for him for 10 years. Everything else I have is yours." People around me rarely mentioned Richard's name. They pitied me, or perhaps they saw right through me, knew I was still tethered to him in some way. My friends skirted the topic, afraid of reopening old wounds. Richard had died at 36, a man of grace, power, and undeniable charm. He had indulged my every whim, never straying, at least not that I knew of, in our time together. As for the past, my head throbbed. I pushed away the memories, the ones that cast Richard in shadow. And Ethan? His sudden appearance, his very existence, had been timed with cruel precision. He always had been lucky, adept at seizing opportunities. Like now. Here I was, at a bar, surrounded by a curated selection of attractive men, each vying for my attention. And then, Ethan walked in, a storm cloud in a tailored suit, come to drag me away. "Where is she?" He scanned the room, his voice cutting through the murmur, his gaze locking onto mine amidst the swirling chaos. Nursing my ice-cold wine glass, I took a slow sip, drawing my legs back against the wall where I'd been half hidden. Rising, I met his gaze, my voice calm, almost amused. "What is it, Ethan? School break already?" Ethan's expression remained unchanged, a granite mask. "I'm taking you home." "I'm busy," I replied, unmoved. "You go on ahead." He didn't budge, a silent sentinel, blocking the doorway. Tall, lean, the boy was rapidly morphing into a man. With each passing year, the genes asserted themselves, carving his features into a sharper echo of my deceased husband, Richard. More than that, though, it was the raw, untamed emotions that flickered in his eyes, the possessive longing that grew with every stolen glance. His infatuation, his desire to claim me, was a suffocating presence, growing wild and unchecked, impossible to ignore any longer. I should have seen the signs sooner. The night of Ethan's high school graduation party, he hadn't come home on time, vanishing without a word. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that a drunken call finally came through. "I'm bringing someone home tonight." A pause, then he added, she lives far away. I don't want her going home alone so late. His voice, thick with liquor, was a low rumble, a sudden, unexpected caress. I froze, then a strange sense of relief washed over me. Ethan had been a solitary figure since childhood, not exactly withdrawn, but certainly lacking close friends. If he was finally making connections, maybe he would finally shift his intense focus away from me. Was this a good thing? My curiosity, however, was a persistent itch. Boy or girl? I asked, trying to sound casual. The receiver crackled with soft, rhythmic breaths. Then, the drunken haze seemed to lift, replaced by a low chuckle. Girl. And very young. The line went dead. I couldn't help but laugh, a soft, breathy sound in the quiet house. Childish. A boy's heart, so transparent, so clumsily concealed. He might challenge me openly, but his underlying affections were glaringly obvious. When Ethan finally arrived with his guest, I was half asleep on the sofa, the sound of footsteps jolting me awake. I blinked open my eyes to a flash of bare skin. A girl in a spaghetti-strap dress, shoulders bare, face meticulously made up, round eyes bright, the corners upturned in a playful slant. She spotted me and her eyes widened, her hand instinctively reaching for Ethan's sleeve, only to be subtly rebuffed. Ethan glanced at me, assessing my sleepy, indifferent expression. His dark eyes narrowed slightly, all trace of amusement vanished. His introduction was curt, devoid of warmth. My father passed away. This is his wife. The girl's smile returned, brighter now, as she stepped closer to me, her voice sweet and hesitant. Hello, Auntie. Wow. This was the first time a girl, barely 18, had called me Auntie. Normally, I'd bristle, correct them, feel a pang of annoyance. But now, looking at them together, a strange satisfaction bloomed. Brooding, orphaned Ethan Blackwood and a bubbly, innocent classmate. Not bad. To prevent Ethan from straying down a path of forbidden desires, a dangerous obsession. I was happy to play the older woman, happy to facilitate a budding romance, to ship this unexpected couple. I rose, smoothing my sleep-rumpled robe, and asked, smiling brightly, have you two been drinking? Ethan's eyes flickered with something akin to hope, though the corners of his mouth remained unsmiling. The girl, Tilly, I later learned, glanced nervously up at him, biting her lip, her voice drawn out, soft. Ethan, what do we do? Her demeanor was that of a delicate flower, afraid of parental disapproval. Ethan ignored her, turning back to me. We did. Are you mad? He scoffed softly, his gaze sweeping over me. If you're uncomfortable with guests, I can have Mrs. Liu book her a room at the hotel nearby. I shook my head. What is this, the Stone Age? I'm not that old-fashioned. A little wine never hurt anyone. Actually, I thought ahead. I made hangover soup hours ago. Would you like some? Ethan was silent for a moment, then abruptly turned away, heading towards the stairs. Tired? I asked him. Headache, he mumbled. Oh, I replied, watching him go. Ethan paused on the step, then hurried up to the second floor, disappearing into his bedroom. Completely inexplicable. Tilly rushed to his defense, her voice earnest. Auntie, Ethan's just like that. Don't be mad at him. I smiled, assuring her I wasn't angry, and went to ladle her a bowl of the soup. Thank you, Auntie, she said sweetly, accepting the bowl. After finishing the soup, Tilly sat beside me, looking like she wanted to say something but hesitated. I couldn't suppress a yawn. Suddenly, she blurted out, Auntie, do you think Ethan doesn't like me? I answered honestly, I really don't know. But you're the first girl he's ever brought home. Tilly nodded slowly, as if processing this weighty information. Then, the floodgates opened. Auntie, I just can't resist good looks. Ethan is so alluring. After this blushing confession, she leaned closer, her tone becoming conspiratorial. Auntie, you look so young and pretty. Could I call you Nora instead? Like a big sister? My heart softened at her youthful charm. She tilted her head, her eyes sparkling. Nora, don't you think Ethan is incredibly attractive? Even if he's a bit cold? I choked back a laugh. In terms of sheer charisma, young Ethan was still a pale imitation of his deceased father. Besides, I wasn't Ethan's biological mother. This was a conversational minefield. Tilly seemed to realize she'd veered into awkward territory, quickly changing the subject. Nora, I'm just curious. Have you ever seen Ethan actually like someone? You know, in that way? A sudden unease settled over me. Ethan's vague hints about someone he liked, it was clearly. Just as I was about to stammer out a reply, Ethan's voice cut through the air from the second floor. Tilly, bedtime. Ethan's tone was commanding, an order, devoid of any romantic nuance. He stood at the railing above, his figure half hidden in the dimly lit hallway, like a silkworm in a tightly woven cocoon, concealing his silent desires. Only his dark eyes held a spark of life. They met mine for a fleeting moment, then quickly darted away. Tilly, ever compliant, giggled, okay, waving goodbye to me before following Ethan upstairs to the newly prepared guest room. That budding romance fizzled out, and when I casually inquired about Tilly a few times later, the trail went cold. And now, here he was, daring to discipline me so openly, a hair's breadth away from confessing his illicit desires. If I'd known then what I knew now, I should have broken his legs, the little rebel. Ethan stood like a fortress in the doorway of the private room. The partygoers inside, feigning indifference, whispered amongst themselves, their malice barely veiled. Someone, a man with slicked back hair and too much cologne, sidled up to me, refilling my glass with syrupy fruit wine. He chuckled, Nora, is this the little bastard Richard left behind? His mother. My stomach clenched. Richard had never mentioned the child's mother, his first love, during his illness. My hand instinctively reached for the glass, bringing it to my lips. A hand, strong and sure, with long fingers and prominent knuckles, suddenly covered mine, halting my movement. He wasn't forceful, but the pale skin stretched taut, revealing blue veins beneath, compelling my gaze. Easy there, Ethan murmured. Take it slow. It was only when Ethan spoke that I fully registered who was preventing me from drinking. My stepson. What right does he have? I thought, a surge of resentment rising. His father never restricted me like this. But then, a bitter laugh bubbled up inside me. Perhaps it was the mention of Richard's first love that stung, that highlighted my own position as the replacement. Maybe Richard hadn't been controlling because he was past that youthful impulsiveness, mature and generous with a new love, but also, no longer truly, purely mine. The glass clinked against the table, a sharp sound that echoed Ethan's words. Home, he repeated, his voice low and insistent. In the flickering, distorted light of the disco ball, I saw his lips move, forming my name. Nora, home. A jolt, a shiver ran through me, a strange, unwelcome warmth spreading through my limbs. Then, a blast of icy air from the vent above. Achoo! I reached for a tissue, but Ethan was faster, already offering a handful, dabbing at my lips with an unnerving tenderness. The room fell silent, everyone staring. I lost my appetite for alcohol, and for the party. Offering a polite excuse, I stood to leave. As I reached for the door handle, Chloe called out, Nora, your purse. Before I could react, Ethan moved with surprising speed, retrieving my handbag and handing it to me, obedience personified, like a well-trained dog. He stood beside me, tall and imposing, his voice a low rumble as he spoke, a strange mix of deference and command. Here. Like a stray dog, tamed just enough to hide its teeth, offering a paw to its undeserving owner. I was suddenly speechless. I glanced up at him. He towered over me, his dark lashes, dark eyes lowered, a quiet confidence radiating from him, as if he already knew the outcome. I'll have Mrs. Liu drive you back to school, I managed, searching for any semblance of authority. Since Richard's death, I'd met other men, but each time, I'd found myself searching for echoes of Richard in them. An intense first love leaves an indelible mark. Even after separation, you carry pieces of them within you. Ethan, he was so much like Richard, sometimes frighteningly so, blurring the lines of memory. Ethan stared back, a silent yes in his eyes, but then he added, I'm worried about you. Let me come with you. Drop me off on the way. Without thinking, I retorted, no. Ethan's gaze swept the room again, his voice clear, unwavering, defying any attempt to dismiss him. Then I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay here with you. The room went still. Someone's glass tipped over, a frantic scramble to right it, eyes averted, ears straining. Fine, let's go, I conceded, irritation bubbling up. I turned and walked out, ignoring the curious, knowing glances, a sudden flush of shame creeping up my neck. Unseen, unheard, a faint smile touched Ethan's lips, the satisfied curve of a predator who had just secured his prey. In the car, Mrs. Liu waited patiently at the curb. As we drove off, I couldn't resist a jab, the words tumbling out, laced with sarcasm. My son is so thoughtful now, so well-behaved. Ethan stiffened beside me, sitting rigidly, then after a beat, his voice even, he asked, I can be even more well-behaved. It depends on what you want. He didn't look at me, couldn't look at me. The city lights blurred through the car window, painting his profile in streaks of neon. His nose, sharp and defined, bisected the light and shadow, obscuring the emotion swirling in his eyes, the desires hidden in his heart. Something shifted in the dimly lit car, a subtle but profound change in our dynamic. Silence stretched between us as we drove. Ethan's university was close to home, the journey short. Before getting out of the car, Ethan paused, leaning out the open door, his voice low, continuing the dangerous, forbidden thread of conversation. Whatever you desire, whatever father could give you, I couldn't help the laugh that escaped me, a short, breathy sound, hiding my lips behind my hand. I asked, amusement tinged with a hint of something else, what can you give me, Ethan? Ethan, framed by the car window, lowered his gaze to meet mine, blurring the distance, masking his expression. Anything you want, he said, his voice soft but firm. Anything I can give, it's yours. I cut through his carefully constructed fantasy, my voice sharp. Do you know what Richards will actually said? 9 more years, Ethan. 9 more years, and I walk away clean. The house, the money, it all becomes mine. You're being incredibly naive, Ethan. Or are you just pretending not to understand what's happening here? Ethan didn't respond, turning into a statue carved from silence. He always had that infuriatingly detached air, as if my words were just background noise, incapable of disrupting his carefully constructed inner world. Ethan, don't come home until you graduate. I'll put extra money on your card. Get an apartment nearby. You can make do. A sudden tremor of unease ran through me. Ethan's eyes, in the dim light, looked suspiciously red-rimmed. But I wasn't his mother. I wasn't obligated to play the nurturing role. This boy was clearly up to no good, deliberately playing the victim, trying to elicit sympathy. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him his pathetic act wouldn't work on me. Richard had already perfected that routine in his final days, and I wouldn't fall for it twice. A gust of cold wind snaked through the slightly ajar car door, extinguishing my anger, leaving a hollow ache in its place. It dawned on me, with a jolt, that it was already deep autumn. A year had passed since Richard's death. My heart, when it came to matters of the heart, felt numb, guarded, instinctively shielding itself from further pain. As I turned to leave, Ethan's voice, quiet but resonant, reached me. All right. But his eyes held no trace of submission. They were the eyes of a wolf cub, wounded but not broken, biding its time, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. One day, he would turn, he would bite back, he would devour me whole. Back home, I skipped the bar scene entirely. Ethan's unexpected appearance had drained the last vestiges of my social energy. Even my girlfriends were buzzing in our group chat. Nora, your stepson is weird. Seriously, when he stood in the doorway, I thought Richard had come back from the dead. Richard wasn't even that intimidating when he was alive. He's trouble, that one. Doesn't exactly respect Nora, but it's hard to put your finger on exactly what's wrong. Olivia, my closest confidant, finally hit the nail on the head. That attitude, isn't that just what teenage boys are like when they have a crush? Possessive, jealous, fetching your purse, blocking drinks, glued to you with their eyes, all simmering hormones. God, I'm shipping this. The chat went silent. No one dared to respond. After a moment of hesitation, I opened the chat again and typed. Don't worry about it. He's just young and confused. I'm just as awkward about it as you are. And honestly, I'm not looking for a relationship for the next decade, at least. No need to play matchmaker. I'm fine. The group chat fell quiet again, this time for good. What surprised me most was that Ethan genuinely stayed away for the next 2 years. He only returned home twice, both times for the annual New Year's Eve family gathering. The first year, he brought me a birthday cake he'd baked himself. Receiving that sugary, heartfelt gift, I couldn't deny the flicker of warmth that momentarily banished the chill in my heart. But our complicated relationship loomed large, and I couldn't bring myself to accept it. I left it on the kitchen counter, untouched, until it sat there, a forgotten monument to unspoken feelings, until it turned stale and began to smell faintly of rot. On New Year's Day, Ethan left early, retreating back to his rented apartment. I hadn't slept, listening to the quiet movements, waiting until the house fell silent again, before venturing downstairs. I saw his retreating back, just as he closed the front door. He'd grown even taller. 18 is vastly different from 26. He was still growing, his future unwritten, full of possibilities. My own 26 felt stagnant, a still pond, unlikely to ever ripple again. I'd assumed his failed gesture would be a turning point, a moment of clarity. That next time he came home, he would call me Mom. But when the next New Year's Eve arrived, he came in from the snow-laden night. Dressed in a tailored black suit, snowflakes clinging to his dark hair, long fingers brushing away the melting crystals, a black umbrella neatly folded in his other hand. And in the other hand, just like the year before, he carried a birthday cake. His expression was composed, almost detached, radiating an aura of quiet power that echoed his father, and yet, somehow surpassed it. "I'm home," he said, his voice low and calm. I searched his face, finding no hint of malice, no unsettling undercurrent. A sense of relief washed over me. "Welcome back," I replied softly. He slipped off his shoes in the entryway, placed the cake on the table, his movements natural and assured. "I'm going to take a shower." I blinked, caught off guard. For a moment, I didn't know whether to pick up the cake or not. Ethan simply glanced at me, then left it on the table and headed upstairs. This was almost like the dynamic of a close, comfortable couple. The wife waiting in the living room for her husband to return home. The husband remembering his wife, braving the winter storm to bring her a sweet treat. Ethan came downstairs after showering, dressed in gray pajamas, and asked, "Aren't you going to eat it?" I hesitated, about to say something, but he was already unwrapping the ribbon, carefully taking out the pristine strawberry cream cake. "Do you want to turn off the lights and make a wish?" he asked. A flicker of unease. This was only going to heighten the intimate atmosphere, the very thing I wanted to avoid. I started to say, "No, I don't." But Ethan seemed to anticipate my refusal. He rose, flicked off the lights, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a lighter. Click. Candlelight flickered to life, bathing the large room in a soft glow. Outside, the muffled hush of snow, punctuated by the occasional burst of celebratory fireworks. Ethan crouched beside the cake, his gaze fixed on me, his dark, damp hair softening his sharp features, making him look almost docile. My throat tightened. My eyes fixed on the lighter in his hand. "Don't smoke," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "It's bad for you. It might be what killed your father." He nodded. He didn't touch those things. He was terrified of addiction, of anything that could control him. Then, he asked, as if the thought had just occurred to him, "He didn't die of can?" "Don't talk about that tonight," I interrupted, a shiver running down my spine. "Don't you think your father's ghost might come back to haunt you?" A soft chuckle escaped him, as if I'd said something genuinely funny. But I wasn't joking. He was trying to seduce his dead father's young widow. "No more morbid talk," he said, his voice gentle, serious. "It's your birthday. We shouldn't be talking about death." He became solemn, formal. "Happy birthday, Nora." "Make a wish," he urged. A strange tremor ran through me. Against my better judgment, I asked, "I can't think of anything. Do you have a wish?" His narrow eyes, framed by thick, dark lashes, flickered almost imperceptibly, but his dark, unwavering gaze remained locked on mine. My mouth went dry. I quickly added, "Good boy, Ethan." He just smiled, a knowing, unsettling smile. A sudden wave of panic washed over me. My cheeks flushed hot. I started to turn away. But he moved swiftly, reaching out and pulling me into a gentle, but inescapable embrace. "Just let me hold you for a moment," he murmured, his voice trembling slightly. "I never knew my parents. I've never had a warm hug like this." He chuckled softly, a hint of sadness in his voice. "I was happiest the first time you came looking for me, the day you didn't know how to approach me. I remember, you were cornered by some thugs, and I was watching from the side. A lump formed in my throat. I remember, I whispered. I'd been accosted, and this stranger, this boy I'd never met, had intervened. He'd chased off the men, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, but his only concern was to chase me away. You shouldn't be in places like this, he'd said, his voice gruff. What kind of place? His brow furrowed, he roughly wiped away the blood with the back of his hand, his gaze intense, searching for words. Finally, his ears turning a delicate shade of red, he turned his head away, mumbling, bad places. Because of Richard's past, seeing this boy, this stranger, felt like a sudden clearing of the fog. Then, Richard was gone, and at the funeral, it was me who led Ethan forward to face the world. Despite the murmurs of disapproval, my support was unwavering, and Ethan had managed to grasp half of Richard's legacy. I wish, back then, you had just walked by, he whispered, his voice muffled against my shoulder. That you had just passed through my life, without purpose, without intention. He buried his face in my shoulder, his words heavy with a painful truth. You know what I want, you know what my wish is. And yet, you are so cruel, so determined to crush my only hope with your own hands. The breath hitched in his chest, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. My wish is. Forget you ever knew my father. Stay with me. My heart, a confusing mix of tenderness and ice. Perhaps it was the thought of the blood tied between Ethan and Richard, or the lingering bitterness of Richard's deception, but a strange grief, a dark humor, welled up inside me, and I laughed. Ethan's arms tightened around me, a momentary rigidity. He probably hadn't expected his confession, his vulnerability, his tears, to be met with laughter. My eyes stung. I sniffed, fighting back tears of my own, and pushed Ethan away, firmly, decisively. Then, I spoke, my voice deliberately light, dismissive. My wish is, that you would call me Mom. He stepped back, his gaze lowered, silence his only response. After a long moment, he murmured, wishes don't come true if you say them out loud. Before going upstairs, he added, almost as an afterthought, remember to eat the cake. The one he'd made himself. Staring at the cake on the table, I sighed, then leaned over, blowing out the candles, cutting a slice, placing it on a small plate. I held it for a moment, hesitating. I knew I shouldn't give him hope, but I also couldn't bear to see his genuine effort completely rejected. The first year's gift, I'd refused outright. This was the second time. Despite my harsh words, he hadn't given up, offering his gift again, hoping. Don't bite the hand that feeds you, I reasoned, a flimsy excuse. It's just cake. Spoon in hand, I took a bite. It was the culmination of countless failed attempts, the perfect balance of softness and sweetness. The bread, perfectly risen, light and airy. He'd watched it bake, crouched in front of the oven, the soft sound of falling snow outside, his hand pausing mid-whisk as he beat the cream. But in the end, he hadn't changed the recipe, hadn't removed the secret ingredient in the frosting, the hidden spice of his illicit desire, his burgeoning obsession, his unforgettable longing. The cake was soft, cloyingly sweet. After a single slice, the snow outside had stopped, the night sky faintly illuminated. A wave of exhaustion washed over me. New Year's Eve, usually a night of bright lights and celebration, felt muted, subdued. I switched off the remaining lamps, plunging the room into darkness. Fighting to keep my eyes open, I stumbled towards the bedroom, collapsing onto the soft bed. Too tired to shower, I thought, my mind already drifting. Just for tonight. The deepest night, the darkness that breeds impulse. Outside the bedroom door. Ethan reached out, gently pressing his cheek against the cool wood. He exhaled slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs, threatening to break free. Silence. He listened, tested the waters, waited. Had it worked? Had the subtle addition to the cake, his secret offering, taken effect? Until the room inside fell completely, utterly silent. The drug had worked. Only then did he move. His hand trembling, he pushed open the door, the barrier between them finally gone. He reached for the woman of his dreams, pulling her close, his body burning, his hands shaking as if scalded by a fever. Overwhelming joy can manifest in strange ways. But for him, it didn't matter. Just this, holding her in his arms, was enough to drive him to the edge of madness, a blissful madness. Tonight was also his birthday. Since birth, Ethan had never had a birthday, never tasted birthday cake on that day. But then, for 18 years, he'd never had a wish, never needed the false comfort of hope, never indulged in fleeting dreams, never craved the ephemeral beauty of fantasy. Until she came to that dilapidated alleyway, her eyes still wet with tears, her face etched with disdain for him, yet instinctively stepping forward to shield him when the thug raised his fist. She couldn't have stopped the blow. But Ethan had moved first, throwing himself in front of the unknown woman, protecting her. The punch landed, a dull thud of pain, but a joyous, uncontrollable explosion erupted in his desolate world, a sudden burst of fireworks in the darkness. As the fading embers of that explosion settled, he saw the concern etched on her face. The fragile defenses around his heart crumbled, softened beyond repair. And in that moment, a seed was planted, blooming in his chest. Fragrant, sweet, mingled with the scent of danger, carried on the wind of the punch, swirling around him. He thought it was just a fleeting emotion, a whimsical infatuation. But holding her now, in his arms, he knew with absolute certainty. The intoxicating scent he'd first noticed that day wasn't an illusion. It was her, the scent of her hair, filling his senses, finally, truly his. Waking up, my back ached, my muscles stiff. Something had been digging into me all night. Probably just sleeping in my clothes. Brushing my teeth, I glanced up at the mirror, and froze. Sometime in the hazy realm between sleep and wakefulness, I'd changed into a silk nightgown? It wasn't impossible. My foggy brain, still thick with sleep, didn't question it further. Unseen by my reflection, hidden from view. Shoulder blade, the curve of my spine, each marked with a blush of crimson, some darkening to a faint purple bruise. Washing up, I descended the winding staircase, coming face to face with Ethan, standing in the living room. My hand instinctively flew to my chest, clutching the silk fabric. "You're still here?" Ethan pressed his lips together, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing around his mouth. He seemed unusually cheerful. "It's New Year's. I thought I'd stay for breakfast." I spun around, hurrying back upstairs, a wave of embarrassment washing over me. I'd assumed Ethan would have left hours ago, like last year. I'd been too lazy to change out of my silk nightgown. It was comfortable, soft, and flowed nicely, but definitely not appropriate attire to wear in front of anyone, especially a grown man, my stepson. After changing, I went back downstairs. Mrs. Liu had prepared breakfast. Facing Ethan in the bright morning light felt acutely awkward. I spent most of the meal staring down at my plate, stirring my oatmeal. Ethan, on the other hand, acted as if nothing was amiss, casually placing food onto the small dish in front of me. I ignored it all. He didn't push, didn't seem offended. I glanced at the small mountain of food he'd piled onto my plate. All my favorites. Thoughtful. Too bad. "I'm going upstairs to pack," Ethan said, breaking the strained silence. I just nodded, non-committal. Packing? What did he even have to pack? He hadn't been home in 2 years. He didn't have luggage, not even a spare pair of socks. Curiosity piqued, I padded upstairs in my slippers, peeking into his room. Unsurprisingly, he wasn't there. But then, I noticed something. He was standing in front of my bedroom door, near my laundry hamper. A moment later, with a practiced ease, he bent down, picked up the silk nightgown I'd discarded, and brought it to his nose, inhaling deeply. His movements were smooth, deliberate, his lashes lowered, but the blush creeping up his neck, staining his ears crimson, was impossible to miss. "Ethan." He froze, then calmly dropped the nightgown back into the hamper, turning to face me. "Yes?" he asked, his voice perfectly composed. "Yes?" My smile was tight, humorless. 2 years of university and you come back, corrupted? Bold as brass, aren't you? Ethan pressed his lips together, his expression unreadable. "Sorry," he said, his voice low. "Wrong room." I was speechless. Just as I was about to retort, he cut me off, apologizing again, his tone laced with a faint, almost mocking, plea. "My mistake. Can you forgive me?" There was a subtle undercurrent of amusement in his words. I was completely disarmed. Finally, I managed to choke out a single word, a furious, frustrated, "Get out." After Ethan left, a nagging unease settled over me. I was usually exhausted after a late night, but this felt different. More disoriented. But I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Frustrated, I pushed the thought aside, sending a quick text message to Ethan, a flimsy excuse to sever ties. I have a boyfriend now. He's the jealous type. To avoid any misunderstandings, don't come home for the holidays anymore. If you need anything, just text. Ethan didn't reply. I didn't think much of it. But that night, as I drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, the phone started ringing, a relentless, insistent chime that refused to stop. Nothing annoyed me more than a late-night phone call, disturbing my dreams. Finally, I answered, a growl in my voice. Silence greeted me on the other end. This bizarre standoff, this prolonged silence, effectively banished any lingering sleepiness. I opened my eyes, glanced at the screen. The caller was Ethan. Well, that explained it. Nora? Are you there? He finally spoke, his voice low, hesitant. He asked only that, then fell silent again. His breathing on the other end was shallow, erratic, his voice raspy, raw. I cleared my throat, trying to sound cold, detached, but my just-awakened voice betrayed me, sounding soft, almost intimate, like a lover's whisper. Ethan didn't laugh. Neither did I. After a long pause, he listened to my slow, even breaths, then asked, his voice barely audible, what do they have that I don't? Who? I mumbled, still half asleep, not fully comprehending, responding instinctively. He scoffed, a self-deprecating sound. Is it just anyone else? Anyone older, richer, more established, anyone better than me? He choked out the words, then quickly, anxiously, apologized, stammering about how he'd overstepped, how his words were inappropriate. I didn't answer. But he persisted, his voice desperate, pleading. Is it just anyone at all? Anyone better than me, Nora? His voice was laced with despair. This was the perfect opportunity. I should seize this chance to crush his hopes, to extinguish his obsession completely. But a strange reluctance held me back. I sighed softly, my voice softening despite myself, tinged with a hint of concern. Ethan, why would you think that? He was carrying so much unspoken pain, a lifetime of feeling unwanted, unloved. But the root of his deepest sorrow, the source of his anguish, was simple, unrequited love. And so, the words slipped out, unbidden, unintentional, because I can't have you. The last word caught in his throat. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Get what I want. A bitter smile touched my lips. I sensed the turmoil beneath his composed facade, but still, I couldn't resist the urge to push back, to reject him once more. There are many things in life we can't have, Ethan. It's not just you and me. His voice was thick with emotion, barely a whisper. Nora. He'd learned it somewhere, that soft, intimate way of saying my name. Nora. Again, softer still, filled with a desperate longing, Nora. One after another, echoing the way Richard used to say my name, so full of affection, so intimate. The irritation of being woken in the middle of the night, the arrogance of this boy, the ghost of a dead man who still haunted my memories. A cold laugh escaped me. Ethan, do you really think you can just get whatever you want? I know what this call is about tonight. And you're right. No matter who I fall for, it will never be you. Out of the goodness of my heart, I'll still acknowledge you as my stepson. But the moment I decide to leave, to stop putting up with this, nothing, no one can stop me. You and I are just two strangers, connected by nothing but circumstance. Thinking a few sweet words, some pathetic gestures of self-pity will soften me? Make me fall for you? Ethan, who do you think you are? If your father hadn't said, care for him for 10 years, and the inheritance is yours, do you think I'd have bothered staying here, playing house with you? I don't need your sincerity, Ethan. I used to try to be gentle, to spare your feelings, because you were young, naive. But you've truly crossed a line tonight. You disgust me. You've made me sick to my stomach. I can't even bear to exchange polite small talk with you anymore. And with that, I hung up. Ethan, I could never love you. On the other end of the line, Ethan held the phone to his chest, pressing it against his rapidly beating heart. Slowly, he closed his eyes. He would grow, he thought. He wouldn't stay this foolish forever. He would, with every fiber of his being, strive to stand before her, worthy of her gaze, worthy of her love. I wasn't sure what Ethan's reaction was to my harsh words. But for the next 2 years of college, he truly didn't contact me again. I told myself I was satisfied. Yet, a strange emptiness would sometimes settle in, a hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't until a conversation with Chloe that I belatedly realized those aimless, adrift moments were all filled with thoughts of Ethan. Chloe, always the gossip, launched into a breathless story. Nora, guess who I ran into when I was picking up my latest boy toy from Statue the other day? My heart skipped a beat. Chloe was known for her adventurous dating life, casting her net far and wide, both young and less so. And her social circle wasn't exactly known for its purity. Could it be? Had she stumbled upon Ethan with some sugar mama, living the high life? The more I considered it, the more plausible it seemed. Maybe Ethan's feelings weren't romantic at all. Maybe it was just a maternal transference, a yearning for the motherly love he'd never had. Chloe, catching my expression, arched an eyebrow and chuckled. What's got you so worked up? You look like you've seen a ghost. Nothing, I mumbled. Don't tell me, Chloe's eyes widened, understanding dawning. She was quick, always had been. And outsiders often see things more clearly. She studied me for a moment, a knowing glint in her eyes. Then, when I finally prompted her, she grinned. Well, I was waiting in the car for my little college fling, and who should I see stroll by but your stepson? Phew, that face, that body, just like his dad. No, even more captivating, actually. He's definitely your type, she added, a sly shift in tone. Ever thought about, getting back out there since Richard's gone? Because honestly, that stepson of yours is looking pretty good. My denial was instant, almost violent in its speed. Absolutely not. Impossible. Then, realizing my reaction was a tad too intense, I softened my tone. Let's just drop it, okay? She pressed on, undeterred. Why not? Think about it, Nora. Richard kind of screwed you over first, didn't he? If he hadn't hidden that whole secret son thing, you wouldn't even be a stepmother. One more word, and I'm actually going to get mad, I warned, resorting to a childish threat. Chloe finally relented, shrugging. All right. Just saying. After a moment of silence, I added, trying to lighten the mood, talking about hooking up with Richard's son in Richard's house. Say it one more time and we might just conjure him back to life. Chloe's eyes widened in mock horror, then she burst out laughing, collapsing against my shoulder. Okay, point taken. Best not to tempt fate. Respect for the dead and all that. Exactly, I agreed. Listening to her laughter, I couldn't help but smile too. 4 years had passed. Richard, it was definitely time to let him fade from my life for good. Graduation came and Ethan, predictably, returned home. For some people, effort was simply unnecessary. Family money smoothed the path, a sizable company waiting for him to take the reins. Commerce wasn't my passion. My years of involvement had left me stressed, confused, and utterly bored. Each workday, I'd drag myself to the office, sit at my desk, and just count down the minutes until I could leave. Thankfully, Ethan hadn't disappointed. He came back polished, sophisticated, radiating an air of competence. His actual abilities were still a mystery to me, but he certainly looked the part. The moment he stepped into the company lobby, he exuded natural leadership. And me? I felt like his slightly older, impeccably dressed, and undeniably attractive secretary. Each time I accompanied him for handover meetings, I couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment at the sheer unfairness of life. Some people were born with all the advantages. Their ascent to power was seamless, effortless. Others, like me, could put on their most expensive, tailored suit, and still look like an assistant. It was infuriating. But, I reminded myself, this was what I wanted. Within 6 months, Ethan smoothly transitioned into the top position, solidifying his control. During this time, our interactions were professional, almost cordial. He treated me with respect, a polite distance. There was no sign of anything untoward. Though, I did catch him watching me, a lingering gaze I'd meet with a sharp, silencing glare. Behave yourself, Ethan, I'd warn, my voice cool. Son. He'd immediately avert his eyes, loosening his black tie, a flicker of discomfort in his expression. But a few seconds later, he'd look back up, a faint, controlled smile playing on his lips, a chillingly calm amusement. I couldn't deny that, in fleeting moments, his sheer physical presence, his undeniable attractiveness, would momentarily unsettle me. But I'd quickly push those errant feelings down, burying them deep. "Ethan," I said one afternoon, as I prepared to formally step down. "Congratulations. Your hard work paid off. You successfully ousted the wicked stepmother and reclaimed your father's empire." Ready to exit the stage gracefully, I attempted a light-hearted joke. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his silhouette sharp against the city skyline. He was impeccably dressed in a black suit, broad shoulders, narrow waist, every inch the powerful executive. For a fleeting moment, a strange sense of maternal pride flickered within me. Good. I thought. My work here is done. I could retreat gracefully, collect my dividends, and finally live my own life. But Ethan didn't respond to my attempt at levity. A slight frown creased his brow. Then, unexpectedly, he turned from the window and walked towards me, step by deliberate step. His hand shot out, snaking around my waist, pulling me into a tight embrace. His other hand moved behind me, towards the door. A sharp click echoed through the room as the lock engaged, solid and final. His expression was composed, almost serene, but a sudden blaze ignited in his eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, almost tender. "Nora," he murmured. "I've missed you, these past 2 years. I've imagined this moment countless times," he continued, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Standing in front of you, holding you, without restraint, even." He lowered his head, his fingers tightening on my jaw, tilting my face up to his. His voice was a low, hypnotic murmur as he leaned closer. "Kissing you, like this." Shock gave way to pain as his lips crashed down on mine, a brutal, bruising kiss that tasted of blood, my blood. Instinctively, I slapped him. Hard. Across his right cheek. He didn't flinch, didn't react with anger. Instead, a twisted smile touched his lips. He gently grasped my hand, guiding it to his other cheek. Another sharp crack resonated in the silent office. Then, his eyes dark, his expression almost pleading, he pressed my palm against his face, holding it there, his skin burning against mine. A faint tremor ran through him, a barely perceptible shudder, but his smile remained fixed, a chillingly serene mask. "Nora," he whispered, his voice laced with a disturbing tenderness. "Where do you want to hit me next?" "Anywhere you want is fine." I stared at him, speechless. "You're insane," I finally managed, my voice trembling. "Ethan." The diligent, driven Ethan. The Ethan who had spent 2 years methodically climbing the corporate ladder, masking his obsession, had finally revealed himself. He was a carefully constructed facade, a meticulously disguised madman. In his private executive office, with its panoramic view of the glittering city nightscape, he had finally succumbed to his true desires. A fleeting glance at the breathtaking panorama. And then, he'd turned away, drawn back to the darker landscape of his own heart. He had kissed me, and then, he had imprisoned me in his private, meticulously prepared basement. Private. His alone. Ethan savored the word in his mind, repeating it again and again, a mantra of possession. This wasn't a basement, not really. It was a gilded cage, a luxurious prison built for one. Ethan had been planning this, anticipating this day, meticulously crafting this method of keeping me. The decor was bright, cheerful, almost aggressively cheerful. Everything was clean, pristine, meticulously arranged. The bed was plush, the linens new, everything designed for domestic comfort, a twisted parody of home. Every detail was a perfect replica of my bedroom at home. Without close inspection, you wouldn't notice the difference. Except for the silver chains. The chains around my neck, my wrists, my ankles. Those were, undeniably, jarringly out of place. Day 1 of basement confinement. He was clumsy, fumbling, trying to, something. I punctuated his clumsy advances with the clang of my chains and 2 sharp slaps across his face. Actually, I only landed one. The second was an invitation, a silent offering he eagerly accepted. Eat, sleep. Sleep, then wake to his watchful gaze. Surprisingly, I didn't feel as panicked as I expected. Perhaps I'd subconsciously been preparing for this. In the 2 years of his absence, I'd heard whispers, rumors of his relentless drive, his almost manic ambition. Someone that driven, that focused, always had a motive. And his motive, his singular goal, was clearly me. Pathetic, and disturbingly predictable. Day 2. He left in a rush in the morning, even forgetting to kiss me goodbye. Company business, no doubt. He had a vast empire to manage, after all. But he returned by midday. And he brought a diamond ring. Dazzling, extravagant, undeniably thoughtful. Ethan slipped it onto my finger, the cold metal a stark contrast to his warm touch. No room for refusal. I considered it for a moment, then said, "Your father gave me a diamond ring from the same brand. Before he died." Ethan's long fingers paused, hovering over the ring, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, as if he might remove it. But after a moment of silence, he pressed it firmly onto my finger, tightening it until it bit into my skin. A possessive act, deliberate and chilling. His was a wedding ring, though, I added, fanning the flames, stating a simple fact. He smiled, a dangerous, predatory curve to his lips. "So? Now you're only mine." Before I could respond, he was on me, pressing his body against mine, his touch far more forceful, far less hesitant than before. I lay back against the plush bedding, no real resistance in me. Ethan seemed content simply to hold me, to feel skin against skin, to luxuriate in the physical closeness. I watched as his dark lashes fluttered shut, then a soft chuckle escaped him, as if a private joke had just occurred to him. He propped himself up on one elbow, his eyes opening, locking onto mine, intense, unwavering. His words, when they came, were soft, almost tender, laced with a chilling possessiveness. "What will you call me now?" he murmured, his voice a silken question. "And what name will you use to beg me for mercy?" I met his gaze, my voice languid, almost bored. "What do you want, Ethan?" His fingers, gripping my arm, trembled almost imperceptibly. After a long pause, he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I want to hear you call me Ash." I responded with cool politeness, "Ash, son." He laughed, a hollow, humorless sound, but a flicker of pain, of vulnerability, flashed in his eyes. "These social labels, these familial roles, before you, I yearned for them, hoped they would acknowledge me, remember I existed. But after you," his voice dropped, thick with unshed tears. "I wish they'd never been invented." The word son hung unspoken between us, a heavy, suffocating weight. 2 simple words. Enough to create an unbridgeable chasm, severing any possibility of reality, of indulgence, of even the faintest hint of reciprocated emotion. But in that fleeting second, something in me snapped. Restraint crumbled. Logic dissolved. Denial shattered. I spoke his name. Ash. Basement confinement, day 2, afternoon. Hearing his chosen name on my lips, Ethan almost instantly wanted to unlock the chains, set me free. But he knew it was a fantasy. It was just a name. A meaningless sound. And even if he had considered unlocking the chains, he wouldn't have had the chance. My rescuers arrived even before the echo of his name faded in the air. Our brief moment of something, whatever it was over in less than 10 minutes. Perhaps Ethan would savor the memory for longer. I was leaving. Escaping this gilded cage, this twisted prison of love, with effortless ease. As they say, experience trumps youthful impulsiveness. I'd anticipated Ethan's refusal to let go. Chloe, my ever-reliable friend, had been ready and waiting, our escape plan meticulously prepared. She rushed to my side, supporting me, her eyes filled with fierce protectiveness as she took in the red marks on my wrists. "Stepson, my ass. We are not playing nursemaid to Richard's bastard child. Do they even deserve our pity? Not one bit." Chloe's voice was tight with fury. "Nora, call the police. Let's get him arrested." "No," I said, shaking my head. "There's no need. Ethan didn't hurt me." Chloe threw her hands up in exasperation. "You're just too soft. That's your problem." I hesitated, my gaze drifting back towards the imposing mansion. Ethan stood alone at the front door, a solitary figure, as if waiting for me to turn back. "Ethan is sick, Chloe," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "Very sick. I don't think you understand." It was something I'd observed in those last 6 months, since his return, subtle clues, barely perceptible cracks in his carefully constructed facade. The daily pills, the ever-increasing dosage. The tremors that worsened whenever he was agitated. I hadn't been wrong to call him insane, a fanatic, a mentally unstable man consumed by obsession. But what had I done to deserve this? Why should I be dragged down into his darkness? He wanted to force his way into my heart, to break every taboo, to leave an indelible mark. But no one had ever asked me what I wanted. Ethan, I didn't owe you anything. And Richard, you too. Predictably, after I left, Ethan spiraled. He became listless, withdrawn, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. Company shareholders, sensing weakness, contacted me, begging me to return, to salvage the situation. I dismissed them with a wave of my hand. Now that I was free from the CEO title, I'd shed even the last vestiges of my public persona. I bluntly told them, if you think you can do better, be my guest. Several delegations came, all met with the same dismissive response. My brief confinement, though I hadn't reported it to the police, hadn't stayed secret for long. Within a week, everyone knew. Outlandish rumors circulated, painting me as a heartless temptress, seducing my stepson, then cruelly discarding him like a discarded toy. If I had possessed such Machiavellian skills, my boardroom battles would have been legendary. Soon after, on a particularly beautiful day, Chloe and I went on a shopping spree, a long overdue indulgence. Midway through our expedition, a light drizzle began to fall. We ducked into a nearby mall, deciding to grab dinner. Afterwards, we were feeling reckless, liberated. It had been ages since I'd enjoyed such carefree moments, not since before my marriage. We ended up at a quiet bar, the kind where you listen to live music and sipped fancy cocktails. Emerging into the night, the rain was still falling, the pavement slick and shimmering under the streetlights. Turning a corner, I nearly collided with Ethan. He was huddled by the side of the street, a hunched, desolate figure. No, not huddled. It was more accurate to say he was waiting. He'd clearly found out I was at this bar and had been waiting for me to emerge. Beside him, another familiar figure knelt in the rain, Tilly, the girl who'd once called me auntie, the bubbly classmate from Ethan's past. Tilly was keeping him company, offering silent support in his drunken vigil. Neither of them had an umbrella. Ethan's eyes lit up when he saw me. He lurched to his feet, starting towards me, then abruptly froze, his steps faltering. He hesitated. Tilly also rose, standing quietly beside him, a silent, steadfast presence. I stopped in my tracks. Chloe, sensing the tension, instinctively grabbed my wrist, pulling me back a step. Nora, let's not tangle with a rabid dog, she murmured, her voice low and urgent. Rabid dog, I thought. A strangely apt description. Grasping the handle of my black umbrella, I stepped forward, determined to end this, once and for all. The fine mist blurred the edges of everything, making it difficult to read his expression. But I could still see the glint in his dark eyes, a feverish, desperate light. Like hope. As I approached, the black umbrella enveloped us both in its small sphere of shelter. He stared at me, his fists clenching and unclenching, his hand reaching out, as if to touch my face. I subtly shifted my head, avoiding his touch. He didn't say a word. Then, with a sudden, desperate movement, he pulled me into his arms, a crushing embrace, as if trying to fuse us together. I didn't resist. I knew arguing, struggling, would be futile. He needed to calm down, to regain some semblance of control before he could hear anything I had to say. Amidst the soft patter of rain, I leaned closer to his ear, my voice cool, detached, utterly devoid of emotion. Ethan, I said, each word carefully enunciated. Don't you realize? You're acting like a dog, I continued, my voice unwavering. How long are you going to keep doing this? Next time, I'm calling the police. Ethan remained silent. As I'd expected, he loosened his grip, the force of his embrace slowly dissipating. He slumped, his head bowed, wet strands of dark hair obscuring his eyes. His voice was hoarse, raw, as he finally spoke. Don't you want me anymore? I considered his question for a moment, then offered a small, brittle laugh. Ethan, I never wanted you. Not once. Never yearned for you, never loved you. With that, I thrust the umbrella handle into Tilly's hand. Hold this, I instructed. Go home. Both of you. Now. Tilly, stunned, stammered, "Oh, okay. Nora, are you sure you don't want to stay with Ethan? Take him home?" "No," I said, my voice firm. "Just take the umbrella. Be careful in the rain." But Ethan snatched the umbrella from Tilly's grasp, hurling it to the ground, into a puddle, sending a spray of water into the air. His voice was a roar of raw fury. "Nora! What right do you have to just hand me off to someone else? Do you really feel nothing for me? Nora, I don't believe you." I met his enraged gaze, my own voice calm, almost dismissive. "And what right do you have to expect me to just accept you? To take in a stray dog I don't want? What makes you think you can drag me down into your darkness, Ethan? Why should I?" Panic flickered in his eyes. His hands began to tremble, violently. Even the first few syllables of my name, when he tried to speak, came out as a stuttered, broken sound. But he still refused to give up, still pleaded, begging me not to leave. He shrugged off his black suit jacket, his hands shaking as he draped it over my shoulders, his teeth chattering as he mumbled, "I'll change my name. I don't want to be a Blackwood." Oh. Right. I was wearing a white dress. Soaked through, practically transparent in the rain. He was trying to protect my modesty, even now, in his despair. He was still sacrificing his last shred of dignity, tearing it to shreds and offering it to me, just for a moment of my attention, a flicker of my gaze. "I only have you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I only want you, Nora. I'll admit it." For a second, maybe more than a second, my resolve wavered. But I couldn't make that mistake. Not this time. Not ever. So, I hardened my heart once more and delivered the final, crushing blow. "It's impossible, Ethan. You're young," I thought, the unspoken words echoing in my mind. "You have so many years ahead of you, so much youth to enjoy, a future that could still be bright. In 5 years, you'll probably barely remember what your stepmother even looked like. In 10, if you happen to see me on the street, you might just think, oh, there's just some old woman. Goodbye, Ethan." In my heart, I pushed away the unwelcome flicker of tenderness, the unwanted stir of affection. I spoke to him as if he were nothing more than a nuisance, a persistent annoyance. The rain continued to fall, a relentless drumming. Then, amidst the chaos of the storm, a distinct sound, the clatter of a plastic pill bottle hitting the pavement. His medication. His fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. He was still taking his medication. It wasn't that bad. I absolutely will not turn back. I won't regret this. Even as my heart ached, even as a wave of sorrow washed over me, even as I felt a pang of something akin to longing, I knew I had to be resolute. I didn't turn back. Ethan alone refused to move, watching my retreating figure disappear into the rain-soaked night, forever frozen in place, trapped in his own unrequited desire. Nora had always been indifferent to him, even hostile. She had never reciprocated his feelings, never acknowledged his existence. Beyond the role of stepson, the meaning he'd desperately sought in his pursuit of her vanished, leaving him hollow, a shell of a man. That night, after I left, I didn't know the harrowing details of what followed. But in my fractured memories, Ethan and Tilly got married. There was a wedding, or maybe there wasn't. A grand affair, or perhaps a quiet ceremony. Either way, I certainly wasn't invited. Otherwise, surely, I would remember seeing Ethan in a white suit. I said goodbye to the past and returned to my solitary life. Sometimes, I'd sit in silence, staring into space, a growing unease tightening in my chest, an inexplicable anger rising within me, directed at Richard, my deceased husband. I couldn't explain it. I remembered the sweetness of our early days, the intoxicating rush of our romance. But I couldn't pinpoint why I was so angry, so resentful, that just thinking of him made my stomach churn, made me want to vomit. Recently, Chloe had been acting strangely, constantly coming over, keeping me company. We were watching a tearjerker drama one evening. She was sobbing uncontrollably, while I remained dry-eyed, unmoved, the on-screen melodrama failing to elicit even a flicker of emotion. Chloe, hiccuping through her tears, mumbled, "Oh God, I can't stand bees. If the leads are clearly in love but can't be together." A sudden tension snapped within me, a taut string vibrating in my mind. I turned to her, my voice sharp, unexpected. Why can't they be together, Chloe? Chloe turned to me, her face tear-streaked, her mouth opening and closing, unable to form words. She didn't answer. But I, inexplicably, found myself providing my own, definitive response. Because of irreversible past actions, things set in motion that can't be undone. Because of societal pressure, the fear of judgment, the cowardice to face the world. And because of the ultimate divide, the unbridgeable gap of life and death, the veil between worlds. Having uttered this unexpected torrent of words, I paused, catching my breath, adding almost defensively, right? Isn't that it, Chloe? Chloe stared at me, dumbfounded, then hesitantly, carefully, asked, under what circumstances would someone selflessly dedicate themselves to helping another person grow up? I don't know about other people, I replied instantly, without hesitation. But for me, it would have to be because of some kind of promise. Or, maybe, they fell in love with the person they were meant to guide. A promise can only last so long, I continued, lost in my own train of thought, my voice taking on a strange, detached quality. It has to be love. It has to be love. Chloe burst into fresh tears. She quickly turned her head away, trying to hide her face, but her sobs were still audible, punctuated by a watery giggle. Nora, you should really write something, she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. You have a real, talent for it. A humorless laugh escaped me. Then, a strange coolness touched my cheek. I reached up, bewildered, my fingers brushing against wetness. Tears. Tears I hadn't even realized were falling. A suffocating weight pressed down on me, a profound emptiness, a dizzying confusion. And then, the fragments of memory, the missing pieces of the puzzle. Something was missing. A blank space in my memory, a void that should have been filled by someone important. When the mind experiences overwhelming trauma, after the initial shock, a protective mechanism sometimes kicks in. The subconscious, in an act of self-preservation, erases the traumatic event from conscious memory. That night, I had walked away, resolute, decisive. But sleep eluded me. Restless, I tossed and turned, until the insistent ringing of my phone cut through the darkness. Picking it up, I thought, if it's Ethan, I won't answer. Goodbye means goodbye. No second chances. But the caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. Tilly. Her voice, when she spoke, was a choked sob, laced with the sound of rain. Nora, please, you have to come talk to Ethan, she cried. A jolt of unease shot through me. What's wrong? I asked, my voice tight. The rain outside my window suddenly intensified, a violent downpour, mirroring the sudden, frantic pounding of my heart. Ethan, he says he wants to see you. One last time, Tilly sobbed. Driving through the storm-lashed city towards that towering skyscraper, I tried to suppress the growing panic, to away the rising dread. It's not possible. Not Ethan. I'm not that important to him. He wouldn't go that far. Not for me. It's just a moment of despair, the shadows of his lonely past closing in. I understand, Ethan. I really do. Reaching the rooftop, I saw him. Standing on the narrow ledge, the stormy sky and torrential rain swirling behind him. The ledge was slick, dangerously shiny. A wave of fear washed over me. I reached out my hand, running towards him, desperate to reason with him, to explain, to plead. Ethan, this is just temporary, I cried, my voice strained. You don't have to do this. You're better than this. You're better than anyone I know. Ethan's expression was eerily calm, the desperate pleading of our last encounter completely absent. He countered with a question, his voice quiet, almost conversational. Nora, tell me then. Where am I better? Memories flooded my mind, his lonely childhood, his unwavering determination, the birthday cakes he'd baked, year after year. Even before I'd understood his feelings, those brief, awkward but genuine interactions, even the moments when I'd lashed out, rejected him, those painful rejections. He is good. I thought. But it's not for me to say. But there was no time for hesitation. I threw out every reason I could think of, a desperate, rambling plea. He remained motionless, scanning the rain-slicked ledge with a detached, almost bored expression, not responding, not reacting. I continued to approach him, remembering the police officer's instructions to stay calm, to try and de-escalate the situation. I had to pull him back. I had to save him. But then, Ethan spoke, his voice soft, tinged with a strange resignation. You shouldn't have come to get me that day, Nora. I shouldn't have come back to this house. A lump formed in my throat. Ethan, why would you say that? I choked out. Having a home, it's a good thing, Ethan. It's my fault, I continued, my voice trembling. I shouldn't have said those cruel things to you, shouldn't have rejected you so harshly. Ethan gently shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips, a smile that blurred through my tear-filled vision. You didn't do anything wrong, Nora, he said, his voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. It's just. I've always been broken. Meeting you just made me greedy. I'm tired, he whispered. Happiness, it's probably something I'll never have. I've been chasing it for 4 years, and in the end, I got nothing. He smiled again, a sad, wistful smile, and took a small step back. Once, he said, his voice fading, I wished that you would be haunted by me, that you would never forget me. 1 foot hovering in empty air. I gasped, reaching out, lunging forward, desperate to grab him, to pull him back. His laughter, light, airy, drifted past my ears, carried away on the wind, lost in the storm. His final words reached me, faint, barely audible. But forget about me now, Nora. Forget about your useless stepson. His body fell, a silent plunge, like countless raindrops merging with the storm-lashed ground, a sickening splash echoing through the night. A raw cry tore from my throat. I collapsed onto the rooftop, half my body hanging over the edge, staring down, my world tilting, shattering. Turning back, I saw Tilly, huddled by the door, weeping silently, her face a mask of despair. Tilly murmured, her voice barely a whisper, if you're not the one, if you don't matter, no matter how much you give, it's never enough. Then, she turned to me, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked with grief. Nora, please, don't misunderstand. I saw how much he loved you, that day at graduation. I gave up a long time ago. Today, when I saw him, I was just worried. Nora, Ethan will be okay, he has to be. Let's go downstairs. We'll find him. He loves you so much. He wouldn't leave you. Not really. I tried to smile, to offer comfort, but my lips wouldn't cooperate, my face frozen, numb. Instead, I picked up the discarded umbrella, unfolding it, and reached out, helping Tilly to her feet. Ethan, I began, my voice a hollow echo. Let's go home, Ethan. Then, I corrected myself, the slip of the tongue a chilling realization. Tilly. Sirens wailed in the distance, the rain intensifying, blurring the world into streaks of gray. Walking past the spot where he'd fallen, I tried to avert my eyes, to veer away, but the crimson stain on the pavement seemed to spread, engulfing everything. The noise, the chaos, the flashing lights overwhelmed me. My legs buckled beneath me, a dizzying darkness closing in. The last thing I saw before collapsing was Tilly's terrified face. When I woke, it was in a hospital bed. Chloe was there, sitting beside me, holding my hand, her head bowed, silent, afraid to break the fragile peace. I blinked, confused, disoriented. Shopping, how did shopping turn into a hospital visit? Chloe's breath hitched, a relieved sigh escaping her lips. She squeezed my hand, her voice trembling as she reassured me, it's okay, Nora. You're okay. Everything is going to be all right. And so, in their kindness, in their misguided attempt to shield me from further pain, Chloe and everyone else conspired to perpetuate my amnesia, to keep the truth buried, to protect me from the unbearable weight of grief. In the aftermath of my memory loss, initially, everyone seemed relieved, almost happy. Richard's company, I learned, had been smoothly managed, its future secured. All I had to do was collect my quarterly dividends. Even though I'd always been financially independent, who would complain about free money? Thinking of Richard, I could only summon a dismissive, almost contemptuous thought. Idiot ex-husband. If he'd been upfront with me from the start, confessed his past before our whirlwind romance, maybe I wouldn't have shed so many tears, wouldn't have endured so much heartache. But no. He had to wait until I was emotionally invested, then drop the bombshell, the honeyed words, the empty promises. What exactly had he promised me? He left me his fortune, that much was clear. But beyond that, his will was strangely vague, devoid of any real expectations, any binding requests. Still, it was something. A small measure of conscience, perhaps. My parents, ever the globetrotters, heard about my incident and rushed back to offer a show of concern, a few days of performative sympathy. Once they were assured I was physically fine, they were eager to resume their jet-setting lifestyle, leaving me to my own devices. During dinner with them, my mother inadvertently let slip, "And your stepson?" I blinked, confused. Huh? They quickly clammed up, changing the subject, their faces tight with unspoken anxieties. Then, they launched into their usual spiel about the best way to move on from a past relationship is to start a new one, and began orchestrating a series of dates with suitable men. These weren't predatory older men, thankfully. Though my family wasn't in Richard's league, we weren't exactly struggling either. We'd always lived comfortably, but in a deliberately understated way. Money had never been the driving force in my life. I'd never compromised my values for financial gain. Except, perhaps, when I'd fallen for Richard, allowing myself to be blinded by love, to be swept away by a romantic fantasy. Richard had wounded me deeply. His betrayal was a stumbling block I kept tripping over, a shadow I couldn't escape. Despite my initial resistance, I eventually agreed to try dating again, to humor my well-meaning, if somewhat misguided, parents. After 4 or 5 awkward blind dates, I found myself sitting across from a man noticeably younger than me in a dimly lit, overly romantic restaurant. He was attractive, undeniably so, and his resume was impressive. Even his dating history was refreshingly sparse. His opening line was surprisingly direct, refreshingly honest. And when I asked why he'd agreed to be set up with a divorced woman, he didn't mince words. "Because you're beautiful," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Okay, then." I declined a second date. "Why?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "I don't date younger men," I said, keeping it simple. "Why not?" he persisted, his voice laced with a hint of challenge. "Does there need to be a reason?" I countered, irritation rising. He smiled, a charming, almost disarming smile, but didn't give up. "Is it that you just don't like younger men in general?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Or is it, anyone else is acceptable, just not me?" "Nora," he continued, his voice softening, "am I missing something in your ideal partner checklist?" My head swam, a confusing swirl of emotions, a sudden, disorienting echo resonating within me. Anyone else is acceptable, just not me? Something clicked. A forgotten connection, a buried memory surfacing. In that moment, a sudden, visceral understanding dawned. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for my purse, fumbling for my phone. Why were there so many searches in my browser history about mental illness? Why did a constant undercurrent of sadness run through me? Why was there a photo on my phone, a blurry, melancholic image of a beautiful, brooding young man's back? The photo had been taken at Richard's grave, the background softened by a light, persistent drizzle. My finger swiped through the images. The first photo showed a young man standing rigidly, his back to the camera, a solitary figure against the gray sky. The next, I'd captured him turning back, a stolen glance in my direction, shadows and light playing across his face, highlighting the sharp angles, the almost painful beauty. Then, a short video clip. The damp earth, the pervasive dampness of a rainy day, almost tangible. The camera wobbled, unsteady, as if I'd accidentally triggered the record button, then carelessly shoved my phone back into my pocket. In the video, I heard my own voice, approaching, offering casual concern. "Do you want an umbrella?" Then, I saw myself, in the shaky footage, sharing my umbrella, more than half of it, actually, because the lens was visibly wetter, water. Droplets blurring the image, the sound of rain intensified, drumming against the fabric above me, soaking my shoulder, my pocket. He paused for a long moment, his voice hesitant, confused. "What are you doing here?" My voice, in the recording, was matter-of-fact, almost clinical. "I'm your stepmother." He took a slow, deep breath, as if bracing himself, then lowered his voice, murmuring something I couldn't quite decipher. Only Ethan himself knew the words lost to the wind and rain that day. Words of regret. Regret for attending his father's funeral. He'd always considered himself an orphan. His father had been absent, a ghost. They had only truly met in death, these two strangers bound by blood. He'd never craved family, never yearned for kinship. But his regret was not for coming. It was for something far more profound. The wind, the rain, had heard his confession, the whispered words revealing a secret, fierce desire. Ethan's voice, soft, barely audible, if I'd known then. I wouldn't have come. At least then. I could have openly, shamelessly, told you I loved you, pursued you. The woman in the memory, the past me, hadn't heard. Dismissing it as the rambling of a grieving, immature stepson, overwhelmed by emotion. But now, years later, I was hearing it. And as I did, the carefully constructed facade of my fabricated memories crumbled, piece by piece, shattering like glass. Without warning, without prompting, all the memories of Ethan flooded back. Ethan had succeeded. He had become unforgettable. I stood abruptly, leaving the bewildered younger man at the restaurant table. I have to go, I said, my voice strained. To visit my ex-husband's grave. This year marked the 5th anniversary of Richard's death. I was 31 now. Leaving the romantic restaurant behind, I didn't go to Richard's grave. Instead, I found myself standing before Ethan's tombstone. Another light rain was falling, a soft, persistent drizzle. I tilted my head, glancing up at the edge of my black umbrella. Raindrops danced and swirled, the air cool, damp. Then, with a sigh, I loosened my grip, letting the umbrella fall, leaving it at Ethan's grave. In the quiet moments of my newly restored life, in the spaces between obligations, between distractions, I found myself thinking of Ethan. Even dating became a fraught, complicated affair. It wasn't just one Mr. Blackwood haunting my thoughts now. It was two. But Ethan occupied more space, far more, a presence so overwhelming it was almost painful. Even in my dreams, he appeared, again and again. I had so much I wanted to say to him. But when the words reached my lips, facing his smiling image in my dreams, they would crumble, falter, become incoherent, meaningless. Waking, I'd feel a profound sense of loss, a helpless yearning. He had asked me, in the end, to forget him. But there were so many things beyond my control, for him, for myself. I had rejected him countless times, fought against my own feelings, but I couldn't deny that his devotion had chipped away at my defenses, that his unwavering affection had stirred something within me, something unspoken, something undeniable. In this life, so much felt inconsequential, fleeting. But one thing, one person, remained etched in my soul, unforgettable. Perhaps it was that day at the funeral, when I'd shared my umbrella, offering him shelter from the storm. Or perhaps, it was the regret that lingered, the knowledge that I hadn't walked with him, hand in hand, under that umbrella, all the way through the storm, and beyond. Bonus chapter, remember your umbrella on rainy days. What if, before Richard and I fell headlong into our whirlwind romance and rushed into marriage, he'd succumbed to his conscience and confessed the truth about his past, about his first love and the pregnancy? When I was young and foolish, I slept with her without thinking about protection, Richard would have confessed, his voice heavy with guilt. She got pregnant, it was an accident. Richard would have watched my face, his eyes pleading, grasping my hands, overflowing with remorse. Nora, please believe me, she said she had an abortion. My face would have been a mask of disbelief, of disgust. I'd have yanked my hands away from Richard, recoiling as if from something contaminated. Disgusting. He was begging for forgiveness, but all I heard was him dismissing his past, minimizing his responsibility, painting himself as a victim of youthful indiscretion. His young and foolish act had resulted in a pregnancy, in a woman forced to make a difficult choice. She was the victim. But all Richard focused on was his regret, his discomfort. I had little patience for irresponsible men. Especially not in someone I was considering entrusting my life to. No matter the charm, the wealth, the allure, such a fundamental flaw in character rendered everything else meaningless. In fact, it was repulsive. I'd have slapped him, hard, across the face. Then, I'd fled, rushing into a nearby fast food restaurant, scrubbing my hands raw with industrial-strength hand sanitizer. Grabbing a quick, tasteless meal, I'd wandered aimlessly, lost in thought, walking down a quiet side street. Rounding a corner, I'd seen a beautiful ginger cat, mewing softly, approaching me. It rolled onto its back, belly exposed, tail twitching invitingly, eyes fixed on the food in my hand. I tore off a piece of bread, crouching down to feed it, thinking, well, at least my luck isn't completely terrible today. Then, a young voice, hesitant but possessive, called out from behind me. Hey, that cat. I'm the one who feeds it. He rushed forward, scooping up the ginger cat, then looked up, catching sight of me. His breath hitched, his gaze freezing, locking onto mine. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft purring of the cat in his arms. After a few seconds, I rose to leave, but he suddenly called out, his voice hesitant, almost shy. "Hey, miss?" "Yes?" He swallowed hard, his gaze darting away, then back, his voice shifting, becoming gruff, almost defensive, as he corrected his earlier, softer tone. "The cat's name is Mimi." He didn't dare look at me, his dark lashes lowered, his gaze fixed on the cat in his arms. "My name is Ash Blackwood." "Blackwood," I repeated, a wry smile touching my lips. "That's my ex-boyfriend's last name." His brow furrowed, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "I don't really like the name either," he mumbled. "But the orphanage director said it was my mother's name." "All right, then, Ash Blackwood," I said, softening my tone, reaching out to stroke the cat. "I'm Nora." "Mimi." "Mimi," I cooed at the cat. The young man, Ash, had fallen in love at first sight, his secret affections carefully concealed, his stolen glances a silent confession. And I, pretending not to notice, playing along. Because, I had to admit, he was my type. And so, an unlikely connection formed between us. About a month later, on a rainy day, I went to the alleyway to find him, but Mimi was nowhere to be seen. After a frantic search, I discovered what had happened. 2 local thugs had gotten to her. Mimi's white and ginger fur was matted with blood, her small body carelessly dumped behind their dilapidated shack, emitting weak, pitiful meows. Mimi was still alive, miraculously. I scooped her up, rushing her to the nearest vet, praying she could be saved. Anger surged through me. I stormed back to the alleyway, checked the security camera footage at the corner, confirmed it was those 2 thugs. Grabbing a broom from a nearby shop, I chased after them, raining blows down on them, a righteous fury fueling my attack. Ash, witnessing my outburst, jumped in, fists clenched, every move calculated to shield me, to protect me from harm. After the brief, chaotic brawl, more of a one-sided beatdown of 2 cowardly bullies, we found ourselves sitting side by side on the steps, breathless, slightly bruised, but strangely exhilarated. A light rain continued to fall, a soft, soothing drizzle. Suddenly, impulsively, I said, "Being a stray, it's so vulnerable. And you can't really care for Mimi properly living here." Ash was silent for a moment, then, his voice low, hesitant, maybe you could take Mimi home with you?" He turned his head away, his eyes shadowed, unreadable. Silence stretched between us. Then, I succumbed to the honest impulse of my heart. "You're a stray too, Ash," I said, my voice soft. "You and Mimi. I want both of you. I could help you go to school, if you'd be willing." He turned back to me, his eyes suddenly bright, brimming with tears. "Nora," he whispered, reaching out, pulling me into his arms, a hesitant, tentative embrace, both protective and vulnerable. Is it okay if I call you Nora?" I bit back a smile, my own eyes stinging. Hey, I teased, my voice thick with emotion. "Big boy like you, crying already?" Then, I noticed it, a fleeting glimpse of color in the gray sky. A rainbow, arcing across the horizon, a promise of hope after the storm. Brilliant, breathtaking, a symbol of good fortune, of new beginnings. He just held me tighter, whispering my name over and over, soft, possessive, "Nora. Nora." I swallowed hard, pushing back tears, changing the subject, my voice deliberately light, almost teasing. "Should have brought an umbrella," I mumbled. "Could have used the handle to poke those guys." He chuckled, a sound that, usually familiar, now held a new intimacy, a newfound tenderness. "I'll remember next time," he promised, his voice low, husky. Walking hand in hand under the umbrella, through the soft rain, until the rainbow touched the edge of our vision. This time I wasn't alone. Of course, all of this was just a hypothetical. A what if.